The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hey, good morning, everyone. This is, or good evening. This is the Agile Coaching Network. We noticed that there was a gap of a place where we can go and share some of the good stories of, what we were doing with Agile adoptions, whether that be a 10-person adoption or, 100,000 people adoption. We wanted a place where we can get some people together and share some of the mindset that we might have and on things that are going well, or maybe there's some things that we might be struggling a little bit with. So on the call, we have a very diverse group of people all across the planet. So, we get a perspective of not just from me sitting here in Portland, Oregon through my Western lens, but we also get people from Germany, India, all across the planet that can, in fact, come and just give us, some of their perspective on how it might be working within that culture. With that, we have our questions up on Slido. We vote them up, we vote them down. And from that, we basically go through, and as a moderator of the call, I'm also a participant. It's a virtual park bench, meaning that at any particular time, if you have something to add to the topic, please just jump in and start having the conversation. So with that, question number one, it looks like the one that's voted to the top was from Adam, and it was, given unlimited power, how would you guide your Agile across a diverse organization? So I assume a large and big organization, how would you do that? And Adam, are you on the call? Did you want to expand on that a bit? Well,
I don't think he's with us today.
Oh, if he's not, then we get to talk about him when he's not here. So who would like to kick that off as far as the unlimited power? Well, not to mind read him a bit. I find it kind of an interesting question because most Agile coaches within organizations, do you guys consider that they have power, in the system, or, in the case of something to amplify to unlimited power?
No, obviously that's rarely the case. I'm trying to think of an example and trying to get into his head and what he's talking about here. Maybe his general manager is fully on board and has kind of written him a blank check or something like that.
And I've had that before where, I've had general managers say that, if you need, for all intents and purposes, you're me for this. And, been handed that check. But I find that, if you're kind of trying to go push an adoption, and he put the word guide. I'm not gonna hold him to the push, but I think that if you had, the full endorsement of the organization behind you, I think that might help some of the early majority come on board, but the late adopters and the laggers, I'm not sure whether or not the unlimited power would really help you in that case.
So this is Linda, and on this idea of unlimited power, I too have been given kind of carte blanche when you're working directly with the CIO, CTO level, and when that's happened. What I interpret that as, and kind of tested a little bit, is that, yep, you have carte blanche, but it's do as I would do. So you have to know that person pretty well to know, like, what sacred cows they're not going to try to barbecue next week. Because they're all still there. And having carte blanche doesn't mean truly do whatever you think. It's truly do whatever I think. And I think there's a hidden trick in there that you have to think like your customer, the leader that is, who's giving you some free reign, as it were. Rather than carte blanche, I'd rather say like giving you kind of free reign. And it's still never a bad idea to let them know directionally where you're headed before you get there.
No, I don't disagree with that, and I think that I've noticed times that when you are asserting great deal of control in the system, and I'm thinking back to my prior Agile days, as a program manager, as a manager, with the power over a particular group. I think the word, again, the word power from that aspect is am I telling people what to do versus are we allowing people to self-organize? Meaning, if self-organization wasn't coming into existence because people were in that learned helplessness where they said, I need somebody to tell me what to do. Maybe the necessity to, kind of frame the problem of let's work on this. And the holdouts, maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't still go and say, hey, look, I got the GM's, carte blanche and I'm going to hit you with it. How about others? What do others think about this?
I feel that this is Ramu from Seattle.
Hey.
Happy to join the calls.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I think as far as exerting power in a virtual team is concerned, I feel that the level of engagement also plays a critical role. So, for example, I have seen many team members trying to do a lot of multitasking. So as a coach, when I've tried to be assertive, sometimes, I didn't have the listening ears fully engaged. So at that point, I had to use some more clout and some creative confrontation, if you will, to drive the point home. So my point is, sometimes, it has to be, it ends up being a more sort of exhausting effort to exert power. Mm-hmm. When it's more, for example, if the relationships are very symbiotic, and there's more give and take, then power becomes less fluid, and it sort of spaces out in terms of boundary spanning relationships.
Okay, I'm kind of curious when you said the confrontation in that case. Can you frame up kind of an example in that case?
So I've seen. So for example, if Joe is connecting via Skype into the meeting, and if he happens to be multitasking, then he might say that, "Sorry, Ramu, I was on mute," and it might require me to say what he has to be doing, a couple more times.
Okay.
So then it becomes, then the conversation becomes a little bit much harsher, if you will, right? So in that sense, it becomes more creatively confrontational.
Okay, so calling people on certain things. I mean, yeah. when you think of the agile adoption, the one thing that I've always asked of the power system, of general managers and vice presidents and everyone else, is that the declaration of we're going to start using the agile mindset, we're going to adopt methods in that space. It really just kind of making sure that we're not questioning whether or not we're going to be agile or not. We are going to be agile as an organization. But what methods we use is up to us as a team. So I found that, the best way that you can get people beyond, especially if you come from large corporate environments where, every year you have a new initiative. This year it's agile, next year it's lean, next year it's something else. That if you just make sure that you're very clear that, let's not argue in the space of whether or not we're going to be agile or not. We've already made that decision. The question is how do we go there?
Right.
And I think that becomes a much more inclusive thing.
Yeah.
Dan, did you have something to offer to us?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking back to his question, maybe looking at it a little bit differently, like, what would be, I don't know, if you had unlimited power, what would an ideal adoption look like? Like if you could construct it and configure it and design it in any way you pleased, what would that look like? And, I think that's I would be a dream come true as a transformation coach like myself. And I think the times I've gotten closest to that, I've actually asked the senior leader of the organization, the GM, whoever, to actually be the coach. So they would teach the classes, they would coach their staff, They would, read all the books they needed to read to come up to speed on the principles and the mindset and the manifesto and the methods and practices. And they would be kind of the embodiment of the chief coach, right?
And that's a good point. I mean, and how many times do you see in organizations where an adoption's going on where Agile is something that those people do? And me, the general manager, I'm going to just stick with my old methods. And that causes a lot of frustration within teams.
Yeah, so if you could get the GM to actually, teach a Scrum 101 class or an Agile mindset class or teach the Agile principles to their staff, I think that's a great way to get started.
Now, when we're saying large organizations, what would be your criteria that you would say that person is living up to that?
Well, you would see it everywhere. You'd see it in how they run their staff meetings, how they coach and guide their staff to execute and do various things or take on projects, and they would train their direct line reports to actually propagate these ideas further down the organization. So they would be doing train the trainer with their staff as well.
Right.
We would eventually see it, trickle into things like, if you have an annual review system, then you would start to see things in there in the annual review, do people live up to these values or not? And that would be part of their performance review.
I fully agree with all those. And what's interesting, what you did there is you actually, you took the unlimited power and you reversed it to making sure that it was across the entire organization, including the person who gave you the power, which is good. I mean, I heard one story at one company that, and literally the adoption was going sideways. And the coach that was there was a very outspoken individual, and they were in a meeting, and apparently the director or the whoever the bigwig was in the room started pretty much harping on people about the adoption's not going as expected, and going on, and this guy was the person who was guiding the adoption stood up, and he actually pointed at him and said, the only one who's not being agile around this place is you. I mean, that's an awkward moment right there to, kind of throw that back into that system. And, I think a lot of times when we frame up the bigger adoptions, looking at specifically, I'll take his word here when he was talking more about the diversity of the organization. Diversity to me in the bigger scope is developers, testers, QA, the in-quality people, the program managers, the finance people, the HR, so on and so forth. I would not stop at the development organization at all. How about others? And if we're ready, we can pivot to the next question.
This is Brian. I think what Dan was saying really hits on the spirit of this question, because I've heard it lately. This is kind of an oblique way of saying what Dan said, which was the power usually is to try and get everybody's mindset aligned when they're not. And when I read it, I thought, geez, unlimited power for me would be to just be able to go over and put my hands on their temples and say, okay, you now have the mindset. And we'll all have the right mindset to do this. And it's usually the outliers, the people that are dragging their feet or dragging other people down, that you want that power with.
I mean, would you go as far though to, and I've always saw, this as being a tough question for the coach or the person driving the adoption. If the person is not helping, I mean, they're literally kicking and screaming through the whole thing and being the distractor in the system. Does unlimited power mean removing individuals, telling that this person needs to go?
I think ultimately that would be the
Yes.
power. Yeah, I would think that you could work your way to that point. I think leadership really, from a leader's perspective, would be to take that person aside and say, like you framed it, Ray, this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. You're either on board or you're not. If you're not, we'll help you find another place where you'll be comfortable. If you are, then Just do what the coaches say, do what the leaders say, and let's get going.
Who else has something to add to that?
Sometimes I think when you've got people who are reluctant to adopt, I mean, not necessarily agile, but any sort of change or improvement, it can be because, particularly in this type of organization we're talking about, if there's already been a lot of initiatives which have trailed out, then people can be waiting to see if this one really is going to sustain.
Right.
So sometimes for me, the best thing to do with those people is to leave them alone, and to talk to them about what's happening, and to talk to them about the things that have failed and that aren't going so well, and ask their advice, as well as to talk to them about the things that are successful. And then sometimes it can be months or months. Well, in one case, I can remember years. It was like 4 years into a change project, and this guy came and said to me, having been really difficult and disruptive right through that process, he came and said to me, I've been in favour of this all along, but I didn't think you'd keep it going. It's just like he needed that long to be really sure that the management team meant it this time, because of the number of changes he'd been put through. So I think it's a very interesting problem about how because it's very easy to feel it personally if people aren't agreeing with you.
Right.
It's very easy to feel like we have to do something about these people and so on. But actually, sometimes they've got really good reason for holding back.
And I agree with that. It's interesting because you bring up one company that I had visited, and I found it really interesting because they actually put all of their teams on this really long wall and who was working with whom. And, when I looked at it, had your groups of, fives, and nothing was bigger than a group of 12. So they were at least honoring some of the things that we've learned of not making those teams too big. But then there were some individuals who were just off on their own. And they were just, these Post-its that were just kind of over there with, Jim or, Karen or whomever that was up there. And they were working and I asked the question, what are they working on? Why aren't they with the other teams? And that was exactly what one of the persons said. They said, well, some of them are working on just a special project that they need to work by themselves. And then the other ones, they're not ready to come in and join a team yet. But we're the board itself was, I think, providing a little bit of peer pressure because it says, here's these people who are working together. And the invite was just open when they're ready because they're really qualified people.
I like that. Yeah, open invite. I like that. Mm.
And I think one of the problems we have with the unlimited power is, and I can tell you as being a manager in my career for part of it, the most difficult thing that I ever had to do, and there was only 3 people in my 30 years, which is, one every decade, that literally I had to fire. And otherwise it was about how do I bring and help this individual to understand what we're trying to do. And so, I mean, I consider those 3 things, those 3 people, partly, what didn't I do? Granted, I had the power to fire them, but it still was an uncomfortable situation.
Mm.
And so I would use that last resorts, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So I feel that this is a very interesting dilemma. However, right, if I hold myself hostage to this being a dilemma, right, then I'm not delivering value. Because in any agile initiative or project, right, ultimately I'm delivering customer valued functionality. So at that point, I'm always optimizing the system, and people resources are also part of the system. So it is in the team's best interest to have the right people on the bus. So I would have a bias towards doing the right things and doing things right. Right, which means making those hard trade-offs about who's in and who's out, especially when they've been given a forum to voice their opinion and they have to speak up, and patience rests in, right. So
Well, and I have no disagreement with that, and that's what I found interesting about that wall of teams is that there clearly were people who self-selected themselves, who said that the current teams that are there, I'm not going to go distract them. I'm not going to sit there and fold my arms and not participate and just be dead wood on the team. I'm going to go off and work on this other work that's over here. And the teams were comfortable with letting them leave. And the individuals were okay being up on those little side projects. But I think there's a point when, you're going to have to bring yourself back into the fold, or, to me, it's the company culture. If it isn't something that you're comfortable doing and like and enjoy, that you should self-select and go find another place. I fully believe that. I don't know if I would have to go unleash my unlimited power on this individual, that they would eventually find that, you're not producing that much value to the team and you're not producing that much, on your own, maybe you should go,
But on the other hand, if they're working by themselves and they are producing value, then I think we also have to acknowledge maybe that makes them a team of one for the moment for this bit of value.
Yes. And I think what I think we get into the challenge with is always in that space of, and I'll again put the big company hat back on, is we would be given a certain allocation of dollars and, and I hate this word, head count, that I have applied to my project. And I'm not sure if I'm reading the other comment correctly, but, if I only have 12 people I can invest and two of those people decide, well, I don't want to work on that project. I think the dilemma is that you're stuck in that smaller box and there's not much flexibility. So does the entire team sink because of those other two individuals?
There's also that thing about heterogeneous, which I think is interesting, because if you've got different teams working in different ways, there can be a tendency to think that we need everybody in the organization to be doing Agile in the same way. Whereas in fact, I think what we want is people to be doing Agile, being Agile, if you prefer, in the way that's right for them. And that can be quite different according to, if that is partly driven by multi-country teams, for example, you can get cultural differences and time differences and communication preferences. I think we can manage those so that each team, each individual has that Agile mindset, but they still are allowed to do things in different ways, that we're not forcing something on them that's about conforming to one particular vision.
And I agree with that. And I think one of the things that, the most powerful thing a leader can do is yield power, meaning that there are some boundary conditions that we need to stay in, but within that boundary, do I make all the decisions, as a scrum master, as a manager, as a leader of some point? No, I want to transfer that empowerment to others, which makes it, I think, better.
Well, that's the nature of servant leadership. I think a leader that's serving his organization will recognize that the key thing, or maybe the most empowering thing for his organization, is to start pushing that decision making deeper into the organization and empowering people to choose what method to use to implement Agile.
Fully agree. Do we want to do we want to switch to the next question? I love that question, by the way. It was actually pretty good.
Yeah, let's
move on because Sven is here. Sven, do you want to introduce us to what you want to talk about here?
Yeah, hi everybody. Yes, it's basically not just a virtual question. It's really it concerns my very own team, which I joined roughly half a year ago, and I think I had the chance, or still have the chance, to start some agile transformation in the team. But what I found here in the team is so basically nothing which is really even close to agile. Let's say it that way. So it starts with the with the team setup, where we have no tester in the team at all, so which is done by a different part of the organization. There were in the beginning no tests at all, and no real planning in terms of let's say meaningful forecast. We have done a planning based on really our estimation of tasks which are 90% unclear with what the content actually is. Maybe you remember my question when we had this session regarding estimating a whole year of work in hours.
Right. I remember that.
Now we started a little bit. We introduced the Scrum framework. We started with the first sprints, and now the team, I think, gets used to it and appreciates the changes. But I think we still have a lot to work on a management and on the project owner part. So the project owner has no clue about Agile and what it means to work in an Agile mode. He's not familiar with software development processes at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he has no understanding why we as a team also need time or have to invest time for testing, for set up testing infrastructure, and things like this. So the question is where to start with all these little problems to keep the team spirit high and on this transition, but also get the management in.
Okay. I mean, there's a couple things here. Number one of the biggest mistakes we made when we were doing early adoption, and this was back in 2000 and somewhere, about 2 years after the manifesto was signed. And it was our first Agile adoption that we were doing back then. And we really didn't spend enough time to understand the Agile mindset, the values and the principles, and what specifically the values of the 12, which one of those were hard or impossible to do within our organization. And we weren't addressing those as impediments. So yes, automation and other mechanical components, or learning the mechanics of, say, Scrum, or the mechanics of, how to do a Kanban board and all those. Yeah, we were sequencing those things in, but we weren't addressing the fundamentals. Why wasn't the business people and developers talking together daily and working through some of the problems that they were having with, say, with the backlog and other things? And so, we say we have a backlog, but the way that we go populate it, the way that we go work on it, should be within the mindset of the Agile manifesto and those principles. And we weren't doing that. And that, until we started to address it and working on those things, I don't think we really got good with Agile. So how about others?
Makes sense.
I'd agree. This is Alan, by the way. Happy Wednesday.
Hey, Alan.
Hey, good to hear your voice again, Ray.
No, it's good to hear you.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Eric. Hi, Sven.
Hi.
Long time no speak. So in answer to this question, I would love to have a team that we could spend a day, as Ray says, going through the Agile principles, understanding, what Agile is. When we were doing training classes, we probably spent maybe an hour, 2 at tops, going through the Agile principles. But if I was given a team, or if I was Scrum Master of a team or manager of a team, I'd get them in a room for a day, and we'd go through the 12 Agile principles. And I think one of the most powerful questions you can ask a team is, what would it take to, and then go through principle number 1. What would it take to do principle number 1 or get good at it? And go through all 12 principles, identifying what are the impediments to being good at that principle. And it would be a really good learning exercise, because the team would be saying, well, okay, I don't understand by what you mean. What do you mean by delivering software regularly, frequently? How frequently are we talking about? And those are some really good conversations to have. And then when the team have gone through that, hopefully they've understood what Agile is about. and we've got a list of impediments like, well, the business or our management won't allow us to deliver every 2 weeks, or our infrastructure won't allow us to do that. So then we've got some things to be working on. And things in that list might be, well, we don't know how to do TDD, or we haven't got any way of managing our backlog. So in other words, there's a list of things that you can go do. And then we just prioritize them. We treat that list of things like a product backlog, and we say, what's going to give us the best bang for our buck, and we start working on it. So that's what I'd like to be doing.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah, I think it's a really practical and pragmatic way to really start the discussion and get the people involved. Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of the comments from the team would be, oh, such and such won't let us do that, or they'll never let us do that because we've always worked this way. And then asking these open questions, like what would it take to work in a different way, gets the team then thinking about, well, okay, if we could replace our manager with somebody else, even sort of ludicrous suggestions like that, but it gets the team talking about how to move past these obstacles.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that is the big mistake that we also made is we picked on the hardest thing to fix. That would take us, example, we've got to automate all these tests. It's going to take us, 6 to 12 months to do that. And we would pick the hardest thing on the list and go work on that, and we would get tired. Versus what could we change tomorrow, or what can we change in the next few days, and have those quick wins and have those, those little celebrations that, hey, we fixed that, minor impediment over here. But that minor impediment, if I had to add it up over the year, it actually saved us 1% of, our velocity or something. And, then make a reinvestment. How are we going to want to spend that 1% that we just, made up? I think it was, and Eric can correct me on this, but Tom Gilb used to say, this 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, if you keep making these one little improvements, that by the time you get 6 months in, you've got, a lot of those things add up. How about others? What are other advice to Sven? I know, Brian, you have something for this.
Well, I was just going to echo what Alan said. Really gets to a focus on mindset. What I've noticed is we kind of skip past the principles usually when we do these intro classes, because everybody wants to know the mechanics. Show me what I got to do tomorrow. Show me what I got to do when I get back to my desk. And taking that time on the principles, I think, communicates that if your head's not straight going into the mechanics, then it doesn't matter what the mechanics are that you do. So I really like that pause to talk about them, to think them through a little bit. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you
think the team will get the right answers to those questions? So I'm a little bit concerned that they all stare at me and then actually expecting the answer from me instead of having an open discussion or and coming to their own conclusion to that. Yeah.
I think that's where these open questions, what would it take, comes into its own, because if you're asking those questions, you're saying in a sort of roundabout sort of way, I don't have all the answers. Let's use the collective intelligence of the team. As an agile coach or a scrum master or a leader of a team, you can almost lead a team down a certain path, but you may not be leading them down the right path. So asking them open questions, I think, gets the collective intelligence of the team working. And if they then say, hey, we really don't know, what do you suggest? Then by all means, you can come up with a suggestion and put a caveat on it and say, hey, I don't know if this is going to work. So let's, design an experiment to see if it will work and see how we get, rapid feedback on that experiment. Because nobody knows everything. And as we know from lots of agile adoptions, there are no two agile adoptions that are identical.
Right. Would you recommend to start with the core team, or would you start, let's say, as many as people as you can get, which belong to this whole process?
It's going to depend a lot on what you think where the problems lie. If you think the team, the actual core team, are where the problems lie, then start with them. If you think the problems lie with the product owner, then maybe a one-on-one with a product owner, going through the Agile principles, saying what would it take to be good at this, might be a really good way to start. But if you know nothing about the characters and where the problems are, then I'd start with the core team and work outwards.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe one-on-one to the product owner makes sense, because I don't think I get him for one day to spend with the team discussing the principles, even if I wish we could do this.
Right. Go on.
Yeah, I think, Alan, you made a great point, and it's very illustrative of the fact that creating that space for that appreciative inquiry to review the questions, allows the culture for the team to evolve and really sort of glue all the relationships, so that people can be vulnerable and dissolve, any conflicts, or dissolve or minimize conflicts, and build that culture and camaraderie. And that space creation is what is so valuable from that engagement, especially.
I like the term appreciative inquiry. I love that.
It sounds
like thing as well. Sorry.
Good. No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say the other thing to think of is, if you're starting with the principles, you have an opportunity to talk about it without necessarily using the word agile or suggesting a concept that you're going to change what they're doing, that you're doing something to them. Yeah. So I think that idea of open questions around the principles allows you actually to move the team towards agile approaches before you introduce that as a big thing that's going to happen. Yeah. And then almost they've got to the point of doing things with an agile mindset at the point that you then start talking about it.
Yeah, I gave already an introduction a few weeks ago, and discussing partially also the principles. And it seems that the whole team, including PO, was at least curious or interested in those things, and were kind of nodding and agreeing to those principles. I think now the next step is to actively make them happen, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think I think it's that ownership that people need to take in them. I mean, some of them are, again, they're really hard problems to go off and fix in a company. And, you just need to make sure that a plan gets created. And what we found is if you just sit down and say, what's the future state of what would it look like to have this, this principle or this value in existence in our company, and then looking at different countermeasures that we can put in place. And guess what? Not all of those countermeasures are going to work, but amplify and dampen the ones that, amplify the ones that work and dampen the stuff that doesn't.
This is Linda. I like the direction that this particular thread has taken. And I would just offer that oftentimes when discussing the principles, I'll ask the group to sit, in groups of 3, 4, or 5, whatever the right number seems to be, to get some good conversation going, and ask them to actually restate them in their own words and what does it mean to them. And I think that helps them really internalize the principle a little bit better. And then going forward, you can even turn that into an actionable. So now that we have this principle, how are we going to act on it? What practice do we want to employ?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think one of the struggles that we have, especially if you're a non-software team and you're using the Agile mindset, there's a lot of software language in there. And I know the case where we were doing hardware and software. So let's kind of rewrite this to where it makes sense to us.
Yeah. So basically my team is a software team within a non-software environment. So it's about only 10% of the company is working on software development. And rest is doing some engineering services, which partially use this software, but are not involved in the software development process at all.
And
have totally different processes to think about. And so does the product owner. So he's, let's say, 90% product owner of the engineering services, and one side job, so to speak, is being product owner of the software development.
Well, not to piss off everyone else in your company, the thing that I would always say is everything is software now.
Yeah.
You could pretend it's not, but you're probably using some form of software someplace in the whole system. So do we want to move on to the next question? We have about 10 minutes left.
Yep.
I don't know if you mind.
Go for it.
One more thought to take this conversation one step further. But I was thinking about, some of the lean principles and some of the lean mechanics and tools and where they came from, and back to kind of Toyota's history. They had a very strong culture, and certainly they adopted some practices from other organizations, Deming, Ford, U.S. military, et cetera. But some practices kind of emerged out of the lean culture. So I'm thinking of things like, single minute exchange of die, emerging from the concept of single piece flow and quick changeovers and things like that. So some of the mechanics, some of the tools of lean are kind of, in some ways, emergent properties of the culture. So I don't know. I think it would be interesting. I haven't tried this before, but what if you were doing an agile adoption and you only taught them the values and the principles, and you asked them to, think about them, reflect on them, and design their own work processes? Would they come up with a new version of Scrum, right? Would they come up with a new version of TDD based on those principles?
That sounds like a fun experiment. I would be curious to see what comes out. I mean, one of my criticisms of, at least with the methods lately, has been, gosh, I'm tired of talking about Scrum. Is there something else there? Is there something else that's not a derivative of Scrum? And maybe this is part of the constraint is that we go in and teach recipes all the time instead of let them be chefs.
Yeah. So if you didn't teach a team Scrum and you asked them to have, a work system emerge, what would it look like if they just kept reflecting on and testing the Agile values and principles again and again and again?
I think that sounds cool.
Food for thought.
That'd be a good workshop.
Actually, that's a good
day workshop.
So what you're saying is put it into a safe environment. Workshop. Let's go and do a design, and if it doesn't go any place, you can always punt back to the other methods if you need to. But I like that.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to lead or facilitate something like that.
We should set something up. That'd be cool. So this next question is kind of interesting, and this is going to hit at the heart of everyone that's on this call, which is lots of consultants call themselves an Agile Coach. And I think there's a lot of people internally, not just consultants, that call themselves Agile Coach. What's the criteria of having the title Agile Coach? ?
I think they need some hands-on experience and some depth of that experience of Agile practices. Because only yesterday I was reading something, and maybe it was on your website, Ray, and maybe it was this question that prompted me to read into it. It was saying there's so many people that have, been on a training class, got certified Scrum Master or whatever, and then they're calling themselves Agile Coaches. I think a lot of what an Agile Coach is about sharing their experience, but with a coaching slant. So I think you've got to balance the depth and breadth of experience, actually hands-on developing products, not necessarily coding, because I'll hold my hand up, I haven't developed any code for a couple of decades. But actually running or coaching or being a Scrum Master or being a team coach with a real team. And then combine that with the skill of coaching. Mm-hmm. Because an Agile Coach isn't there just to tell. Yes, they're there to educate, instruct, train, whatever you want to call it, but they're also there to get the best out of the team. And one of the ways of doing that is by asking questions. Open questions that get the team thinking about, how does what we do today fit with that Agile principle? So I think it's a blend of depth and breadth of experience doing it, and the ability to impart that experience and knowledge without necessarily telling. So, in other words, the coaching ability. Anyone else got anything to add?
Does anyone agree with Alan or disagree with Alan's criteria?
Definitely agree. So you have to have
I agree.
really hands-on experience. Yeah.
Now, but what degree of?
Yeah, totally agree.
What degree of hands-on experience? And I think the measurement is the interesting thing here, which is I think people self-select and call themselves Agile Coach. But
yeah, and it's almost like, would you really want to put a number of years or number of projects on there? Because someone might have done it an awful lot, but they may not have won any friends in the process. So I think this is where perhaps when you vote for a president, sorry to go there, but
why did you do that?
When you vote for an Agile coach, that would be a great way of determining whether an Agile coach was worthy. Was what are the people that he's coached say about him? What are the people that's worked with him say about him? Is his years in this job, just years in the job, and he doesn't do a very good job? So I think that's a big part of the criteria. Is what do other people say about this coach?
So you mean that you don't give yourself the title, others give you the title?
In a way, yeah.
Yeah. So that works until you're actually responding to an ad, right? And it says they're looking for an Agile coach that has these skills. They're a Scrum Master, this, that, the other thing. And agreeing, with the first gentleman, I forget who it was, saying that it was depth and breadth, but also it's how much depth and breadth and what kind of experience, to the point of what would people say about you, but how would you describe your experience? So I can tell you that in trying to hire Scrum Masters and Agile coaches and product owners, that there are plenty of people who have the right initials in their title and they call themselves, whether it's a coach or a Scrum Master, but their level of experience ranges from very poor to very good. And it's hard to get that, what was their actual experience, unless you're skilled enough to know to ask the right questions around, to ask an interviewee, for example, could you tell me, the job you did at XYZ company, and how did you implement Scrum, and what were the most successful practices, or, think questions like that to get at the details. But I still think there's a fundamental question out there for all of us to say, what does it really mean for you to declare yourself a coach? And how does that differ from other roles in the Agile community?
And maybe also a good question is how to figure this out as a team which is not practicing Agile yet, but wants to. And how do you figure out to get a coach, which is worth the money and, of course, in the end?
I was just thinking, you were talking about interview questions. I was just thinking that these ACN questions that we've been going through over the last few weeks would be great interview questions.
Actually, that's true. I think one of the, I'm always reluctant in the measurement of myself and how I measure and look at myself and all that type of stuff. And so criteria-wise, I think Alan was hitting on a couple different key points. The demonstration, have they demonstrated the ability to be able to assist a team to become self-organizing? Now, but I'm also, because I think the coaching is a spectrum, meaning that I'm really good at a couple of things, and I'll, not to, from an ego perspective, saying that, yeah, Ray's good at this, but there are some things I'm good at, and there's some other things that I'm not so good at, but I understand my limitation, that maybe I need to call Linda in for this, or maybe I need to call in Alan for this, because they're much better at this than I am. And then I will sit back and then also learn from them how to become better at that. So I think there's sort of this thing that I want of an Agile coach is when they understand that, hey, I'm if you look at the sports analogy of I'm a good first base coach, but I have no idea how to coach the outfield, Yeah.
I mean, it's like I said, I haven't written code for 20 years, so I think I'm a good Agile coach, but I couldn't teach a developer how to do TDD. And I think that the mark of a good Agile coach is to know where their limits are and say, hey, I can teach you all about product backlog and planning and this, that, and the other. But if your main need is to learn how to do TDD and refactoring, I know someone that's better than me at that. Whereas if an Agile coach comes in and says, oh, yeah, I can do all of that, then chances are they're blowing smoke.
Yes, and here's the rub. So what my experience has been is that a lot of clients expect that one-size-fits-all coach, right? And I always recommend that even if it's on a part-time basis, you bring in a second person, one, to fill skill set gaps, to Ray's point. I'm good at some things, and I am not nearly as good at some other things. The good news is I know some people who are really good at those other things, and if we brought them in for a couple of weeks, that could really give us a leg up. But I also find that a hard sell with many clients. They really are looking for that jack of all trades coach, rather than admitting that, yes, it would be better if we identify that there are technical coaching needs, there are executive coaching needs, there are team coaching needs, and they all require, some nuances and some specialization. The spectrum of the work that we can get engaged in is quite broad. And I think, that's another challenge, is how do we educate the community to that point that, yes, you've got a great coach and they're great at these areas, and, they complement well with someone who has these other great coaching skills in other areas.
Right. And I fully agree with that. And maybe part of it is that maybe as a community, we need to sit down and have that conversation of maybe there is a different designation of coach, meaning we have someone who's a Scrum coach, and they're really good at teaching the mechanics of Scrum. There's certain ones that have, maybe there just needs to be a little bit more criteria behind the type of coach name. Agile is too big and broad, let's get a little bit more specific on some of it. So we are at the top of the hour, and like always, this particular podcast gets put up onto SoundCloud and iTunes and all of those really other cool places that allow you to tell your friends to come over and listen to these things, because it's a way of amplifying this particular phone call to a number of different people who you feel that could use it. If you know people also to join the Agile Coaching Network, we are currently over 100 now that have joined, and that are members that are either actively posting questions or otherwise joining the call when they can. And I appreciate everyone who comes in and participates. And hey, I will talk to you guys all in 2 weeks.